Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to a special bonus episode of Press the Button, a Plowshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security.
Everything seems impossible until it happens.
Everyone would be affected by a nuclear war.
Our government is planning to spend trillions of dollars to develop new nuclear weapons that we don't need.
You can't win a nuclear war.
We are all experts on nuclear weapons because we are all going to be affected by those nuclear weapons.
And here is your co-host, Joe Cirincione.
We have dodged a war, at least for now. This is Joe Cirincione, president of Plowshares Fund, with a special edition of Press the Button. This has been a hectic and tense 6 days of war fever. We've been on edge. On Monday, I sat down with Bill Press for a behind-the-scenes interview of what's going on, what the thinking is in Washington, what the thinking may be in Tehran. This is what we present to you today, a crossover episode. Bill has his own podcast, the Bill Press Pod, and I've been talking with him for years about these issues. He came to our office here at Plowshares Fund, and we talked for 30 minutes. We present this podcast to you unedited. Since we talked on Monday, things have changed. We had Iran's carefully calibrated missile attack and Donald Trump's stand down from any further military action. So we have a pause in the action. But that doesn't mean the crisis is over. It could go back. The same trends that Bill and I discussed in this podcast are still there. Those in Washington who want to go to war. Those in Tehran who want to go to war. The unpredictable leadership in both countries. The underlying tensions, the many actors, the many forces in motion. It's far too early for us to relax. There are just too many variables, too many uncertainties in this crisis. If we've learned anything from these 6 days in January, is that this winter will be long and full of terrors. We've arrested the slide into the pit of war. We must now begin to climb out. We hope this episode helps you understand what we have to do and what we must avoid.
Joe, it's good to see you. Thanks for giving us some time.
My pleasure, Bill. Thanks for coming to my office.
Right. Now, I think everybody wants to know, how much trouble are we in the Middle East?
This is bad. This is very bad. You have to go back to the prelude to the war in Iraq to think about what this could lead to and the kinds of projections we had back then that proved to be an underestimation of how bad it could be. This is clearly the biggest foreign policy crisis of the Trump administration. And I would argue you'd have to really go back 40 years to think about this kind of crisis that it could become. Because the war with Iran will make the wars with Iraq and Afghanistan look like warm-up acts. This could get quite big quite quickly.
Susan Rice, in an op-ed in the New York Times, former national security advisor, said it's hard to imagine that this could end up with any other consequence than war with Iran.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yes, I do, unfortunately. And I've been working on avoiding war with Iran for, as you know, a good 12 years since I became president of Plowshares Fund. It's been one of our big objectives. And we succeeded. We helped get the U.S. and Iran to negotiate the anti-nuclear agreement. We defended that agreement against people who wanted to tank it. We avoided the war that many people wanted. But those people who wanted war, they never gave up. And they've been pushing this ever since. There's a great article by Adam Weinstein in the New Republic this week talking about Pompeo and his long-term campaign to do this war. It has nothing to do with Soleimani. It has nothing to do with threats of imminent attack. They have wanted to overthrow this regime. They're well-funded. There's a network of think tanks and organizations here in Washington that have been pushing it. As you know, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister still of Israel, has been promoting it. The leadership of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have been pushing it. Well, it looks like they're going to get their wish. Trump has been resisting this, interestingly enough.
Right.
And many of our donors...
Until now.
And many of our donors, we're a foundation, we accept donations to to do things like this, advance peace and avoid war. And they thought, no, Trump's never going to go. Trump doesn't want to go to war. It's not in his interest to go to war. He'd lose the election if he started a new war. And we were somewhat sanguine that Trump himself would prevent this from happening. But for whatever reason, we're now stumbling into the catastrophe that many of us had hoped to avoid.
Which raises a question, I think, central to this discussion. What kind of confidence can the American people have in Donald Trump as a leader at a time like this, when how he would approach it, what skills he brings to it, what patience he brings, what reason he brings to it? But not only Donald Trump, but the people around him.
None whatsoever. Remember, this is a man who's told 15,436 lies and counting, according to the Washington Post. He has decimated the national security apparatus of the United States. I've lost count of how many secretaries of defense and Homeland Security advisors and national security advisors we have, but about a dozen people have cycled through those offices. He's just helped weaken our alliances, and the attack on General Soleimani weakens them further. He has shown no discipline, no ability to absorb the kind of complex information that he could have every day from the intelligence agencies. A man of great impulse, a megalomaniac, a narcissist, obsessed with bettering Barack Obama's legacy. I mean, one thing that people point to about this, he was still jealous about the attention that Barack Obama got for killing Osama bin Laden, and he didn't feel he got enough credit for killing Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, and so this was another scalp he wanted to show that he was stronger and better than Obama. You know, it's a very, very bizarre president presiding over a fractured national security apparatus. That's one of the big arrows that are pointing towards war, is the unreliability of the national security apparatus in the United States to control an unstable, unpredictable president.
Everybody agrees that Soleimani was an evil man.
Yes.
So could you say this is a guy who planned several attacks which ended up killing who knows how many Americans, and that thereby his end was probably planning more attacks, that his assassination was justified?
No, I don't think it was justified at all. There's a difference between killing a terrorist leader like Baghdadi or Osama bin Laden, who doesn't have a nation to mourn them, and killing a military leader of a sovereign state who was visiting an allied nation or associated nation, Iraq, to talk to the leadership of that country. Remember, we killed an Iranian military official in Iraq, as he was about to, according to the Iraqi president, come pay a visit to the Iraqi president with a diplomatic mission, not to plan attacks, according to the Iraqi president, but to convey some details of some diplomatic exchanges that were happening, ironically, between Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq. Iraq was trying to broker some agreements here. So is this an evil man? Did his actions kill U.S. troops? Yes, but so did North Korean leaders, so did North Vietnamese leaders, so did the Chinese, so did the Soviets, and these are the people you talk with, right? So if you want to reach agreements with your adversaries, you have to have discussions with them, even though they are evil, even though they have committed unspeakable acts. So no, the fact that this man killed Americans does not automatically make him the just subject of a U.S. assassination effort. You've
mentioned the person who is probably the architect of the assassination of General Soleimani, Secretary of State Pompeo.
Yes.
The one who seems closest to Trump during all this. Okay, so in the day after the assassination of Pompeo on television, Sunday morning, all the shows, right, said, first of all, that there was an imminent danger of attacks that he was planning, imminent danger.
Yes.
The world is a safer place without him, and that this actually decreases the chance of conflict.
Well,
any shred of truth in anything Pompeo says?
No. let's unpack that just a little bit, because there's kind of two aspects here. Is what he's saying true? And the answer is no. And it's sort of self-evident. At the same time, he's asserting that Americans are safer. He's telling Americans to leave Iraq, to leave Yemen, to leave the region. He has also united the region around Iran. Remember, just a few weeks ago, there were major demonstrations in Iraq against Iranian presence. Those have now ended. There were major demonstrations in Iran against the government. Those have now ended. The demonstration of support for Qasem Soleimani was in the millions of people in the streets of Iran, hundreds of thousands in the streets of Iraq. You can manipulate crowd support, think Trump inauguration, or rally. You can get tens of thousands of people to do almost anything, but millions of people? No, that's something profound. And so you see this thing is already backfired. Having said that, let me say that I do think that the administration is winning the narrative. And I think they're winning the narrative with the media, the help of the media, who refuses to ask some of the tough questions and bring on alternative voices to the normal Washington crowd here. And by that, I mean they have discipline. They have a disciplined party. They have their own state media in Fox News that are hammering home a very simple message. Iran is a terrorist nation. This was a terrorist leader of a terrorist nation. He was plotting to kill Americans. We were acting in self-defense. It's a good thing that we killed him. If Iran tries to retaliate, we will strike back even harder. That is a message that is very simple to say. Look how quickly I said it. Mm-hmm. And it resonates with a lot of Americans. So I see there's a new poll that just came out today that showed that only 43% of the American public support the killing of Soleimani. I was really surprised to see that. That's basically Trump's core support. Right. But it's only 43%. However, if Iran should strike back at the United States, well, it's very, very hard for the American public not to support a military action after an attack, even if we were the ones who started this escalatory cycle.
Right. Is there any doubt that Iran will retaliate?
I don't think so. I think it's impossible for them not
When,
to.
how, where?
Well, the new leader of the Quds Force, Ismail Ghani, who was put in place by Ayatollah Khamenei just within 24 hours. The idea that Soleimani was irreplaceable. Unique, yes. Irreplaceable, no. This is a very large organization. And Ghani has been at the right hand of Soleimani for decades now. So I don't think they're going to lose a beat. This is not a gain for U.S. national security, killing this one man. It doesn't diminish Iran's capabilities. And they have so many ways they can strike back at us. Let me just count the ways. And some of the things they've already done. Attack Saudi oil facilities. There was a cheap, simple attack involving a few dozen rockets, scared the bejesus.
Let's just say they've already done that.
They've already done it. Attack tanker traffic in the Persian Gulf. Already done it. But those were light attacks. That was a taste of what they could do. They could shut down the Straits of Hormuz overnight. About 1/3 of all tanker traffic goes through the Straits of Hormuz. About a fifth or a sixth of U.S. of oil globally. You do that, you start to push the global economy into a recession. You do that, stock markets sink. And by the way, so do Trump's reelection prospects. But that's just one of the things they could do. There's also, as they've said, their forces are within reach of approximately 35 U.S. bases and facilities in the region. They've already started activating their proxy forces. The Quds Force is global. People have said that it makes al-Qaeda look like amateurs. So you could see U.S. economic targets, U.S. economic assets targeted around the world, whether it's Kentucky Fried Chickens in Vietnam or Trump hotels. You could see them targeted. And finally, and this is the new wrinkle that has been tested but not yet exercised, cyber warfare. The Iranians, after we attacked them with the Stuxnet virus that crippled their centrifuges, they stood up the Iranian cyber army, and it is quite formidable. They've already penetrated U.S. facilities, and they could do so, again, with devastating consequences.
And you pointed out these attacks could come from Iran itself or maybe more likely from their proxies, which they have Many.
Many. And I would suspect they will try to hide direct Iranian involvement. I don't think that will be successful, but they will try to give some deniability to the actions.
You mentioned the role of Plowshares Fund in the Iran nuclear deal, 2015, right, under President Obama. Did all of this start to unravel with Trump's pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal?
Absolutely. There's a direct line to pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran anti-nuclear deal, and everything that has followed since. Remember, there were no rocket attacks on U.S. forces while we had this Iran nuclear deal. There was not an expansion of Iranian influence while we had the deal. The Iranian problem was contained. We had issues, but they were all manageable issues. Once you pull out of that deal, and once you signal that you want to have a coercive policy towards Iran, that you're going to have a policy of what they call maximum pressure, then you start to engage in economic warfare with Iran. And we are trying to strangle their economy for the purpose of toppling the government, right? Mm-hmm. So that is war. That is economic warfare. Iran shows great patience in this. They don't leave the deal. They don't violate the deal. They stay in full compliance with the deal for about a year. And then that's when you start to see Iran pushing back to show that there are limits. But even so, their movements are kind of calibrated. You know, there's some, like the tanker attacks. Nobody died, right? No, the commerce wasn't stopped. It was a warning to them. These kind of attacks. It's only very, very recently, as the U.S. has kept pushing, that you've seen the Iranians go a little further. But even so, the rocket attack that supposedly triggered this killed the first American. And I mean, it's been years since an American died at the hands of an Iraqi militia linked to Iran. But that was a relatively minor incident, probably not planned by the Iranians, but that was the excuse that some in the State Department were looking for to start pushing towards a more kinetic response, as they say. And
now, perhaps not definitively, but in effect, Iran has said the deal's off. You know, we're not going to. I mean, they did leave an off ramp.
That's exactly right.
But I was going to ask you. So, what is the impact of that announcement by Iran?
Right. So, this just to the nuclear part of it.
Right.
So, this is the deal that, remember, rolled back the Iranian nuclear program.
15
they ripped
years
out.
At least.
Yeah. They froze it. Put it under lock and key with inspections. The strongest nonproliferation agreement ever negotiated, in my opinion. A big success. Avoided the war, solved the problem, at least for 2 decades. Okay? So now Iran has said, look, under this agreement, we have the right to exceed the limitations imposed on us if the other party, the United States,
walks away,
is not fulfilling their obligations. That's what they say. That's their claim. And there's some truth to that. And what they've done now is announced their 5th action, exceeding the limits. This is the most significant one. They said the limits on centrifuges is off. We're going to start installing new ones, and we're going to start stockpiling the uranium gas. What that means is they get closer to the point where they could sprint to a bomb. It's nothing we have to worry about now. They cannot make a bomb now. It would take them at least a year from right now to amass enough uranium for the core of a bomb, and probably a year after that to build one. So it's not an urgent threat. But they've left the door open. They said, just today, as we're recording this, the Foreign Minister Zarif said, we are ready to come back into compliance if the U.S. does, if we get this. So, as Miracle Max says in The Princess Bride, it's not all dead. There's a difference between all dead and mostly dead. Mostly dead means you're slightly alive.
Yeah.
And so the deal is slightly alive, meaning if we can somehow keep it alive for the next year, a Democratic president could come in and rejoin it, bring Iran back into compliance, and that architecture, that framework is there to help solve at least that nuclear part of the Iranian problem.
Could that be the off-ramp we're looking for?
It's the off-ramp a year from now, but I don't think Trump administration is interested in an off-ramp. And that's what worries me.
In fact, the president said and repeated today, boy, if they strike us, we're going to hit them hard. We're going to hit them fast. 52 sites, and including cultural sites.
Right. He had committed 2 war crimes, or he declared his intention to commit 2 war crimes in the last day, which is disproportional attack. Nope, you can't do that. You can only defend yourself in proportion to the attack. And 2, the Hague Convention, which George W. Bush helped pass the Senate in 2008, prohibits the targeting of cultural sites for obvious reasons. You're trying to restrict the damage that wars can cause. Trump either doesn't know or doesn't care about this and just argues that, there are no rules in war. We're gonna do whatever it takes. We're gonna hit you as hard as we want. It's a very New Jersey thug approach to international relations.
He knows that. To what extent do you think this is just puffery on Trump's part?
Oh, I think it's mostly puffery, but it's puffery with consequences. Because remember, when he gives an order, the military executes it. So the kind of thing you might say at Mar-a-Lago when you're not president of the United States, we should kill that SOB. You say it when you're president, it's like, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? Well, the military hears that order and they have to go execute it. They freaking proposed it foolishly, thinking no one will take this option, right, in the briefings, but he does take it. And so that's a difference between, braggadocio and orders. And unfortunately, we may not see the worst. I mean, he's getting a feel for this now, right? I mean, look at what he just did. He reached out and touched Soleimani. He got him. And so why not do it again? Why not do it to somebody else? Why not do it in larger force? Could that extend to pressing the nuclear button? Yes, it could. He has the same authority to declare that we're going to have a nuclear strike in Iran as he does that we're going to have a drone attack on an Iranian military commander.
Joe, the first reaction we've seen to the assassination of General Soleimani is the Iraq parliament met and passed a resolution asking the government of Iraq to basically tell the Americans to get the hell out. Is this unexpected, and is the government of Iraq likely to move on that? And if they do, what happens?
I think that Iran may achieve one of its big strategic objectives. Ironically, Soleimani was trying to get this done while he was alive, but his death may seal it. The parliament met and they voted unanimously to expel U.S. forces or request the expulsion. It was just the Shia members who met, by the way. The Sunni and the Kurdish members did not want to vote on this because, remember, Iraq is actually three ethnic groups. Shia are the majority, but there are these others who have an interest in having the U.S. stay. The Kurds in particular, the Sunnis in particular. So it's not clear they want them out, but it's probably politically impossible for those groups to argue for them to stay after the U.S. violated the terms of the agreement. Remember, we don't just go in and occupy countries technically. We have basing agreements with countries. So under the basing agreement, we were there to fight ISIS. That's why we were there.
We were there at their invitation.
At their
correct?
invitation. When ISIS was at the gates of Baghdad, we moved troops in to help stabilize that, defeat them. And we were fighting with the Iranian-backed militia and the Sunni militia and the Kurdish militia in Iraq to defeat ISIS. I mean, that worked. I mean, that shows you a military strategy that works. And now we're turning, basically, on the Iranian-backed militia for political reasons, for ideological reasons, not because they were attacking us. They didn't attack us first. We started pushing against them first. So
right.
It's important to know history, to know how this thing started before you start thinking whether this is a good idea or not. I think it's almost inevitable that U.S. forces will have to leave. And if you leave Iraq, well, then the forces in Syria are going to have to follow because they're supported by the Iraqi forces. So ironically, we may be seeing, we'll know more by the end of the year probably, a major turning point in the U.S. involvement in the Middle East. We may actually be coming closer to ending some of these endless wars, not by design, but by secondary effects of an idiotic policy.
Which was one of the things that Trump said he wanted to do in the first place.
He may in fact be fulfilling his promise by accident.
in the most unlikely way.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
And see, this is not in U.S. interest. Because one thing to us to negotiate a respectful retreat, an orderly retreat. It's another thing to be pushed out of a country. This weakens U.S. legitimacy, credibility. It's already weakening our European alliances. You can see Pompeo over the weekend was complaining that he wasn't getting enough support from our European allies. Well, no wonder. They think this is nuts. Why would you do this? So this incident already, just as of right now, if it stopped right now, it has already caused irreparable harm to the U.S. alliance system and U.S. standing in the world.
One thing that I found stunning was we've spent who knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars building this fortress, this embassy, this green zone in Baghdad, and the protesters were able to get there and penetrate it and set this reception area on fire.
Right. It's the largest embassy in the world, largest U.S. embassy, largest
and
anybody's
would think
embassy.
Would be impenetrable.
However, it's quite large. So where they got to, they got through the green zone because they were militia. Normal people couldn't have gotten that far, and there was Iraqi government support for this at least from the Shia members who were there. A national security advisor to the president, for example, was present at the demonstration. So this wasn't just a mob, right? So we understand that. And they hit one part of the embassy, the reception area, yes, but not really deep into it. And so even that was sort of, you can see the Iranians were behind this almost certainly, and were attacking and were showing their displeasure. Because remember, we had just killed 25 Iraqis, 25. For the death of one American contractor. We just killed 25, and they were furious at this, but still it was calibrated. No Americans were hurt. Property damage, yes, but didn't go too far in, and within 24 hours everything dispersed, and they brought it back. So that was their tit for tat. That was their pushback. I don't think anyone suspected that Trump was going to do what they did next.
So we see this unrest, if you want to just be almost polite to call it, that we see in Iraq today, and this confrontation with Iran. On the other side of the world, what's up with North Korea? You and I have talked about this several times.
Oh, I expect a major missile test this month. And, Kim Jong-un doesn't like to be ignored. So he had dominated the spotlight. I mean, this was what we were talking about on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. He declared that he was going to have to take a different path now that he's been unable to make a deal with the United States. And he promised the test of a strategic weapon, meaning nuclear, in the near future. Somewhat vague about when. There's 3 or 4, maybe 5 different weapons he could test. I would suspect it's going to be an ICBM, and I expect we'll probably see it in January.
So what does this say about Donald Trump's approach to North Korea?
Complete failure. A complete failure. I mean, and he had a promising opening.
3 summits so far invited to the White House?
Singapore, Hanoi, and then the crossing of the DMZ. So in some ways, he did the right thing. This is very unorthodox, but he opened up a channel of communication. He sort of flipped the script. He gave him the big prize at the beginning of negotiations. But there was an opening there. But again, I got to point to Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, hardline ideologues who killed the prospect of any deal because they insisted on an all-or-nothing approach. We remember what Bolton called the Libya model. In other words, you give up everything, and then we'll do something. And that was completely unacceptable to Kim Jong-un. That's what killed the Hanoi summit back in February. And of course, Pompeo and Bolton and Trump have destroyed the State Department, so you have very few knowledgeable people in place. The one good news, one thing to look for, is if Mike Pompeo will please leave office and go run for Senate. And then Steve Biegun, just sworn in as Deputy Secretary of Defense, who does know how to get a deal, could actually rescue this Trump policy in North Korea before the worst happens.
But isn't it true and yet ironic that Iran is being basically attacked for doing exactly what we wanted North Korea to do? Suspend their nuclear program.
That's exactly right. So this is not, see, these things reflect on each other. They bounce off each other, right? So North Korea is looking at Iran. They say, well, wait a minute, you made a deal with them. They disassembled most of their program, which is what you want us to do. You gave them sanctions relief, and then you took it back. And then you waged all-out war. Well, how are we supposed to trust you? How could we possibly lay down our arms on your promise that you'll be nice to us? We'd be idiots. And they're right. They're right. So Trump has done enormous damage to the ability of the U.S. to negotiate reasonable compromises with other countries.
Not to mention, again, the Libyan model, where probably the last thing that Kim Jong-un wants to do is end his life in a sewer pipe.
Exactly right. I mean, Kim Jong-un, he may be crazy, but he's not stupid. He understands the way we operate. He doesn't trust us for 1 minute. I think he overreached a bit himself, thinking that he could trick Trump into a better deal than Trump was willing to offer. So both sides made mistakes, but the onus has got to be on the superpower, on the United States. We had more cards to play, and we didn't play any of them.
Back to the Middle East. Is it time to bring all of our troops out of Iraq?
Yes, it is. This is the one good thing that might happen from this. That we do not have a winning hand here. I mean, I understand why people want to keep the troops in Afghanistan. I understand that people
that was my next question. Time to bring the troops home from Afghanistan as well?
But it's been a disaster. We've been lied to repeatedly from the beginning of we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud to we're winning in Afghanistan. It's been a series of lies under Democrats and Republicans. Get us out of the Middle East, support the troops, bring them home.
And now's the time.
Now's the time.
Joe Cirincione, you're on top of it as always. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks
for your good work, and congratulations on your podcast. Press the button. We'll see you on the podcast. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, Alex Spire, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Research by Alex Spire. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.